REINS is an acronym for Rules of the Executive in Need of Scrutiny. And it gets to the heart of sort of this question of separation of powers in government.
Welcome to the Debrief, Carolina Journal's weekly recap of some of the major developments in North Carolina politics and public policy. I'm Mitch Kokai, sitting in this week for Donna King, and we're going to have another interesting program for you talking about major developments at the General Assembly, what's up with the latest in the debate over the state budget, and talk about one of the latest political controversies in North Carolina. We'd love to hear your opinion about any of the topics we discuss. Please comment, like, subscribe, do all of those things that you do on social media when you see a program that you like or don't like. We'd love to hear what you think about the program. Joining me, we've got a couple of excellent panelists for you today. First, we'll turn to Donald Bryson. He is the CEO of the John Locke Foundation, which oversees Carolina Journal, and for this legislative session has spent a lot of time down at the General Assembly, which makes him an expert. He would be anyway, but certainly even more of an expert on a lot of the stuff that we'll be talking about during the course of the program. And joining us now for the first time is Carrie Carswell. She is a content creator for Carolina Journal and will be telling you about one of her stories that she worked on during the course of the week coming up in just a bit. All right, well, getting to the program now, the big thing that happens during what's called the long session of the General Assembly is dealing with the budget, writing a new 2-year budget plan. We're going to talk a little bit more about the budget in just a bit, but right now, budget talks are on hold, which means the General Assembly is dealing with some other issues, and at least a couple of those are issues that are very important to the John Locke Foundation, which is one of the reasons we wanted Donald to join us this time around. Donald, let's start with a bill that I have been referring to jokingly as the act formerly known as the REINS Act. Right. Tell us a little bit about what the REINS Act is and what we've seen recently.
Sure. So they've changed its name, obviously. It is still House Bill 402. If anybody wants to look at that at ncleg.gov. and look up that bill, formerly known as the REINS Act. REINS is an acronym for Rules of the Executive in Need of Scrutiny. And it gets to the heart of sort of this question of separation of powers in government. Everybody who knows, and if you watch Schoolhouse Rock or if you went through third grade civics, you know that it is the job of the legislative branch to pass laws, and then it is the job of the executive branch, or the governor in this case, and all the various departments he controls to execute those laws. But when it comes to regulations and regulatory powers, there's this massive gray area. And a lot of legislators have been reading what groups like the John Locke Foundation and Americans for Prosperity and the Pacific Legal Foundation have been talking about, which is let's explore this gray area a little bit more. At what point is a regulation so large in terms of economic impact that it is in fact a law? And so that's the question that the REINS Act goes into, and so it basically sets up tiers of approval requirements for regulations. If in this bill, which by the way has been passed by both chambers and has been sent to Governor Stein and is awaiting his signature veto or just letting it pass into law, if a bill has an economic impact, or if a regulation has an economic impact of over $20 million over 5 years, then it has to come back to the General Assembly to be approved. It is big enough, it has a significant economic impact enough to be a law. If it is between $10 million and $20 million over 5 years, then whatever board or commission approves that regulation has to unanimously approve it. And then there are other like tiers of $1 million and things like that, and has to have 3/4 or approval and that sort of thing. So that's the gist of this bill. But the John Locke Foundation has been working on this since 2015.
So happy to see this advance to Governor Stein.
Absolutely.
So another bill that is of great interest to the John Locke Foundation has to deal with power bills and ways to ensure that the things that the state is doing to address carbon emissions don't end up costing consumers an arm and a leg. Tell us what's been happening on that front.
So 4 years ago, there was a large piece of legislation. It was House Bill 951 that passed in 2021. I can't remember the name of that bill either, but it was House Bill 951. And it basically set up a carbon plan, a plan for North Carolina to advance to carbon neutrality in its electricity emissions by 2050. There are a lot of things in there, but remember, keep in mind the 2050 carbon neutral target, but then it also had an interim target. At 2030, we needed to be at 70%. It is difficult for conservatives, economic conservatives, to sort of beat the carbon genie back into the bottle, right? And we're not a fan of the 2050 target, but at the point that they're going to do this, we worked with the General Assembly at the Locke Foundation to say, you can do this, that's fine, but if you're going to put these rules in place, you're going to have to also require the Utilities Commission to take in account cost and reliability on the grid. And so we took a bill that was bad and made it less bad. And so 4 years on, we are revisiting, the General Assembly is revisiting that bill. The big thing that Senate Bill 266 does, the Power Bill Reduction Act, is it removes that 2030 target of 70%. Conservatives have long talked about all of the good things that nuclear power could do for the grid in the state of North Carolina and nationally. But if you put the 70% target on there, it shoehorns solar power, especially, onto the grid. The reason is because you can put solar panels into the ground. I'm doing this. They literally place them in the ground in fields all across North Carolina, and you can do that very rapidly. It takes some time to build a nuclear power plant. It takes some time to convert a coal-burning power plant into natural gas, or to build a new natural gas plant. And so getting rid of that 70% target allows for more natural gas and nuclear onto the grid and doesn't force solar onto the grid, which requires more redundancies, battery technology that doesn't exist yet, and that sort of thing. And so over time, public staff has said that this bill will save $15 billion in power bills across. Power bills are not necessarily going to stay flat. I don't think anybody is saying that, but this is a less expensive path by $15 billion than going down sort of the solar and wind route. And so that's what that does. It also allows for, we say Duke, but utility companies, generally speaking, in North Carolina, to do some faster cost recovery. And there's been some agreement between Duke and the Manufacturers Association and the electric cooperatives so that shareholders and ratepayers are sort of sharing in that risk together. But basically, if you think about taking out a loan for any type of construction, this means that Duke is going to be able to pay on those construction loans while they're in construction, rather than making ratepayers pay for construction plus interest at the end of it. And so that also helps control costs over time.
And as we're speaking, this bill has made it through both chambers, but not in a final form. We're kind of waiting the final version to be finished and sent to the governor.
That's right. The House has passed this. Actually had broad bipartisan, or really good bipartisan support. I think 11 Democrats came across and voted for this bill in the House. We anticipate at the time of recording this that the Senate will concur and send this to the governor this afternoon.
Carolina Journal has been covering both of these issues along with the John Locke Foundation, so you can find more at johnlocke.org and carolinajournal.com. If you want to know what else has been happening at the General Assembly, be sure to go to carolinajournal.com for coverage of other bills, including the one that we now bring in Carrie to discuss. You were focusing on a bill that deals with social media use by young people and some efforts to make sure that there are some safeguards in place?
Yes, so the House Standing Committee on Commerce and Economic Development passed on Tuesday House Bill 860, which is a data privacy protection bill. It's entitled Social Media Control in IT. So essentially what that bill does is any social media platform that has over 1 million monthly U.S. users will no longer be able to use the data provided by minors in North Carolina. So often you'll click into an app and it'll say, can we accept cookies, or here's how we use your data. This bill safeguards minors in North Carolina from their data being used for algorithm purposes or any kind of advertisements.
Did this bill, when it was in that committee, get pretty widespread support, or was there any pushback?
It passed unanimously. Wyatt Gable represented the bill, as well as Representative McNeely, and Wyatt Gable is the youngest ever state representative at the age of 22, so he's my age. He kind of called on his experience and his friend's experience with social media addiction, and really this bill just targets protecting children from seeing unsavory things on the internet and their data being used for advertisements or tailored algorithms so that it feeds you this ongoing addiction. There's a couple of other bills that have been passed in the House targeting this same kind of effort. So House Bill 301 was passed early this month, which would ban children under the age of 14 from having social media accounts, and then require parental consent for anybody 16 or 15 years old in North Carolina. And then House Bill 959 bans social media in the classroom, and that passed almost unanimously with a vote of 106 to 1.
I have a feeling that this is an issue that the General Assembly is probably going to be dealing with for a while,
Yes.
because social media has become such a part of everyone's lives, and you need to know how best to deal with it from the standpoint of young people.
Right.
So we'll be following that. I'm sure that's a bill that will have some legs moving forward. We talked earlier about the fact that the big item for the General Assembly during the course of a long session is the budget. All of this other stuff that we've been talking is happening while not much seems to be happening on the budget. Remind us, Donald, where the John Locke Foundation stands on the competing budget plans.
Cut spending now is where the John Locke Foundation stands. The House and the Senate, it's funny that the three branches of government, the governor, the House, and the Senate, that's a joke.
Yes.
Anyway, the governor rolls out his sort of proposed budget, and the General Assembly ignores that entirely. And then the Senate comes out, because it's the year after a presidential election year, so the Senate begins with the budget this year. And they rolled out their budget. Luckily, and the Republican leadership at the General Assembly has done this for several years now, they agree upon a spending limit ahead of time before they begin any budget writing, which is a good place to start. And they both agreed to $32.6 billion, which is a daunting amount of money.
And that's in the general fund.
That's
it's
the
even
general fund.
larger if you put everything
Yeah,
else in
it's over $70 billion if you include all the federal funds that come in as well that they also control. But the state general fund of state government revenues that come in is $32.6 billion, and that's the spending limit that they've agreed upon. The Senate passed their budget, or their budget proposal, and sent it to the House. They are more aggressive on personal income tax cuts. They continue to let the corporate income tax phase out. They give teachers a little bit of a raise, I believe at 3.4%, but they do have a lot of pork in there, including they keep $100 million in a reserve fund to give to NC Innovation, $25 million a year. We'll talk more about that later. And then they take $400 million from that $500 million endowment from NC Innovation to give it to joint UNC and Duke University Children's Hospital. I think it's a 500-bed facility. They sent their budget to the House, and the House is they've agreed to the same spending level, but they are more aggressive in teacher pay increases. Instead of the 3.4% proposed by the Senate, they are doing 8.7%, which is a very large amount of money given all the teachers public school teachers that we have here in North Carolina. They slow down the revenue triggers. So we've cut taxes in a smart way here in North Carolina, that if such and such amount of revenue comes in to the state government, then the tax rates can go down. And if it keeps coming in, then the tax rates can go down. And they slow down those triggers, making it more difficult for the tax cuts to happen. They're concerned about a so-called fiscal cliff that may or may not happen. And there are a lot of reasons why they should be concerned about not creating budget shortfalls, but there are also a lot of really good reasons about why the forecasts that they use have been wrong for the past 10 years.
Which the John Locke Foundation has documented.
Which the John Locke Foundation has documented. I think the last count that Brian Balfour, who's our Vice President of Research, did is that these consensus forecasts from OSBM and the Fiscal Research Division have been wrong by about $12.6 billion over the last 10 years, which is substantial. That's a lot. That's an awful lot. It's nearly it's more than a third of a given state budget. That being said, the House does a really good thing in that they claw back the entirety of the NC Innovation Endowment, and Carolina Journal and the John Locke Foundation have talked a lot about that. And they put it towards disaster recovery to the Hurricane Helene Recovery Fund, which is something that we support, and we think that is good policy. So it's an interesting place that they agree on a spending level. They both cut taxes. They cut taxes in a different way. The Senate is obviously more aggressive. There is a concern about a shortfall. And we sat back here at the John Locke Foundation, had a lot of conversation about, what do we think about these two budgets to compare it, and there's good and bad in both of these budgets. I think the Senate spends too much in pork, the House spends too much in recurring costs, and they could come to an agreement a lot faster, I think, if they actually agreed to spend less money and then there would be less wiggle room, and they could actually approach those tax cuts faster. So that's sort of where it is. Hung up in there are conversations about donor privacy legislation for people who give to nonprofits like the John Locke Foundation. Certificate of Need reform, the Senate put in a full repeal of Certificate of Need in their budget. The House did not, but that's part of the negotiations. And then you've heard me mention it 3 times now, what are they going to do with the $500 million endowment to NC Innovation, which is a nonprofit organization that they gave $500 million to as an endowment to basically be a venture capital fund for public university research.
Yeah, so lots of stuff still to be decided on the budget, and as of yet, no timeline on any decision on the budget. Well,
with the fiscal year ending June 30th.
That's right, and we'll be following this very closely moving forward. Before we sign off, we also want to hit one topic that isn't really about what was happening in committees or on the floor of either the House or the Senate, but this was a bit of controversy involving one member of the General Assembly. State Representative Julie Von Hafen of Wake County attended that No Kings protest, the anti-Trump protest, the one that took place in Raleigh, and on social media highlighted a picture of a person who had a sign that also had along with it something that looked like a decapitated President Trump, along with another decapitated person, I think a Trump aide.
I think it's supposed to be Stephen Miller.
Stephen Miller.
Yeah.
And so there was a social media firestorm over this. Representative Von Hafen removed the image, but it had already been captured, it had already been put across the social media sphere, and she actually, on the floor of the House, ended up apologizing for this. Donald, your sense of this incident in the whole realm of where we are in terms of political violence and concerns about people being way over the top and way too far in their political debates.
Yeah, so the John Locke Foundation is a public policy organization. We are not political in nature. We just believe in good policy, but we have to live in a political environment, right? That's where public policy is made and thrives. And so I understand the irony of what I'm about to say, but we're at a place in American society that we totalize politics. You know, whoever is in office, whether that be the North Carolina General Assembly or the Executive Mansion or the White House or in Congress, it is an existential crisis for the opposite party. And you know, I feel like people would have fewer panic attacks every 2 to 4 years if we would talk about taking power back from government. You know, if somebody would be Frodo and actually throw the Ring of Power into Mount Doom and do that, and I think that's what happened with Representative Von Hafen, that she made a mistake. She clearly made a mistake. I'm not, just candidly, I'm not convinced that she necessarily apologized. I think it was sort of maybe I made a mistake by posting this on social media, but you know, the situation forced me to do it. And like, when I post things on social media, and I think when the typical person does, they take a picture of an event or pictures of the event and they try to present it in its best light, right? That's why social media is not a real place, because they don't see me yelling at my kids, they only see my kids smiling. And that's the sort of thing with this event. But this is the image she chose to depict to the world of, look how proud I am to be here. And I have a lot of questions about her judgment just based on that. I'm a little surprised the House didn't move to censure her, just to be completely candid. I'm glad she did make a public statement, and if people want to take that as an apology, then that's fine. But it is a symptom of we totalize politics. We make it existential in nature, and somehow as a society we have to figure out how to walk that back. But the 24-hour news cycle and social media, obviously in this case, really perpetuate that.
Carrie, we want to bring you back in. You did not attend this particular No Kings protest, but for Carolina Journal, you covered a similar anti-Trump protest that dealt with immigration policy a week or so earlier. Tell us what your sense was of that event and people's moods and how they were approaching political debates and division.
The mood of that protest, everybody seemed really angry. It was, you know, I use the term fighting words were being thrown around at that protest. Lots of signage with explicit language and just throwing around expletives the whole time. I didn't see any signs being held with a decapitated Trump, though. And that protest did remain peaceful in the sense that no looting or rioting occurred. We saw several members in the demonstration wearing gas masks or holding gas masks. I assume to indicate that they were ready for escalation at any given moment, really. But overall, the mood of that protest, people were angry. They were chanting, calling for Trump's impeachment. I even saw and heard a few statements saying that the real criminal is in the White House.
Did you ever have a sense there that things might get out of hand, or did it seem like it was going to remain, while angry, just peaceful?
Well, the whole time I was on edge, just ready for anything at any moment. But yeah, overall, the people there were just saying a lot. There was no physical violence of any kind, but the words that I heard seemed, like I said, fighting words, angry. They're angry at the Trump administration. They're calling for his impeachment. And I tried to get, as far away from those people with the gas masks as I could so that I didn't get any of that. So, but yes.
Well, it's very interesting. And of course, Carolina Journal will be keeping up on those protests, the reaction to the Trump administration in North Carolina, and all of the things happening at the General Assembly. Carrie Carswell, Donald Bryson, thanks for joining us. Thank you for watching. We'd like to hear your comments, and please like and subscribe to the program. And the Debrief will be back again next week.
Did you learn something? Make sure you subscribe to Carolina Journal's YouTube channel and watch the Debrief every week, where we're going to be breaking down everything happening in your state government. And check out carolinajournal.com for the latest breaking news.